r/NoSleep. Posted by u/Harambe_556. I saw my neighbor in my backyard, late at night. This happened to me around 10 years ago now, when I was in my late 20s. This is the only experience in my life which genuinely haunts me, and I almost couldn't bring myself to write it down at all. I had moved into the house 6 months before, a bungalow in the suburbs. I had got it for cheap, on account that it was in need of serious repairs, but I was into DIY, and was more than ready to jump into a fixer-upper project. After a few months, I had dealt with the worst of the exposed drywall, and it began to feel like a home. It seems strange now, but the area was really nice. The estate agent actually mentioned that there had been almost no violent crime in the last decade or so. Almost all the other residents were either old-timers, living out their last years in peace, or families with small children, lured in by the good schools in the district. The only neighbor I had that didn't fit this pattern was Dalton. He was a 40-something, unmarried, never really had any family or friends visiting. In fact, I reckon I would have hardly seen Dalton outside his house if it wasn't for the fact that he walked his dog, Dingo, a small, yappy thing, at least 5 times a day. At the time I worked from home on my laptop, and would often sit outside in my front lawn when the weather was good, which it usually was. I don't know why he walked Dingo so often, but every morning, every evening, and every day at noon, I would see Dalton take the dog out for a half-hour circuit of the block. I also have no idea what he did for a living, something from home, evidently. We would exchange casual small talk whenever he passed by my yard along the sidewalk. He always seemed to instigate these short conversations. That was the weird thing about Dalton. Sometimes, he was completely antisocial, opening his door a crack and answering in a hushed and reluctant tone when I knocked on the door to ask for milk. Other times, he was overly friendly, almost desperately engaging me in pleasantries, like a man starved for social interaction. Honestly, I did not really know Dalton at all. He was one of those people we pass and interact with every day like a lamppost or a pigeon. We do not give them a second glance. I wish now that I had known him better. Like I said, the night it happened, I had lived in the house for 6 months. You might expect that night to have been stormy, or foggy, or unusual in any way, heralding what was to come, but it was just like any other night, except for the fact that it was dark. Yes, all nights are dark, but this night was darker than most. The darkness coiled around my house like a black scarf. I could hardly see the end of my back garden from my window. Dalton's house was directly to the left of mine, but it was detached, and so, from my leftmost living room window, I could see into his own living room. Now, every night without fail I could see Dalton in that room, in his armchair, reading long into the night, well past 3 in the morning usually. But tonight, the room was dark. I distinctly remember that at the moment I noticed that fact, a vague feeling of unease washed over me. I should not have been rattled by such an innocuous observation, but I was. The second irregularity about the night was the fact that I could not hear Dingo barking. Most nights his yaps and whines would keep me awake. Twice, I complained to Dalton and was ignored. Tonight there was nothing but deathly silence. The house looked so still that I thought for a moment he might be out of town, but his car was still visible in the driveway. It was as I was peering, perplexed, out of my living room window, that I heard the sound. A clunk at my sliding glass door, the one which led into my backyard. In my anxious state, it made me jump, and I jumped again when I whirled around and caught sight of him. There was a figure at my sliding glass door, fiddling with the lock. It was such an eerie sight, that large black silhouette, with the moon frame behind it. The figure's head jerked up, hearing me move. Later, I would wonder about why it didn't occur to me that he clearly did not want me to notice him. At first, I was rooted to the spot in fear, an initial, primal reaction. But the rational part of my brain kicked in quickly, reassuring me, it was only Dalton. Our yards were connected, and he probably needed assistance. Maybe Dingo was hurt or sick. "Dalton?" I asked shakily. "Is everything alright?" Dalton was standing strangely. His posture was lopsided, almost sagging downwards. And his build looked almost emaciated, like he had somehow lost weight, an unnatural amount of weight, in the 5 hours since I had last seen him. I don't know why it didn't occur to me then, clearly, that nagging fear was still clouding my judgment. "Help!" he croaked. I say croaked because that was the sound he made. The words seemed to scrape involuntarily from his throat. His voice sounded ragged, like he had a severe sore throat. "Help me!" I began to walk over to him, to those doors. I slowed down as I got closer, that age-old feeling of something's not right here holding me back. I took a few more steps, until I was inches from his face at the glass. It was unmistakably Dalton standing in front of me. For a few moments I had been nursing a subconscious suspicion that this was an imposter. I only realized that this fear had even existed when it was proven to be false. But I was still baffled. His form was most definitely thinner than when I had last seen him, and he looked to be in a very bad way. It was hard to tell in the dim light from my room which leached into the outside, but he looked to have several bruises and gashes staining his face. His skin looked to be soaked with sweat, and his whole face looked gaunt and pale. His hair appeared both dry and greasy at the same time, encrusted with some kind of mud or dirt. His ears were misshapen, almost lumpy. It's strange, but it's always the ears that I see first in my dreams. His entire body seemed unnaturally stiff and yet at the same time seemed to twitch and shift incessantly. The only way I can really describe it is that he looked like someone had taken Dalton and starved him for weeks, then placed this unnerving, new version of Dalton before me. "Let me in." And I reached out to the lock to do so. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the fact that something quivered and trembled beneath his jaw before he spoke. Maybe it was the way his lips looked to be stretched just a few centimeters too tight over his gums. Maybe it was the little dangling curls of something pink and moist around his chin. Or maybe it was the fact that the deep, deep eyes which stared into my own were green, when I knew for a fact that Dalton's were blue. I began to take a few tentative steps back, my entire brain on fire with alarm signals. The steps turned into a sprint as I saw a squishy mass fall from the roof of his mouth and slide down the glass as he pounded on the door. I locked myself in the bathroom, dialing the cops. The rest of the night is a fever dream, a hazy mixture of hysterical terror, flashing sirens, and an utterly inhuman laugh, floating into the night. They found Dalton in his bedroom, dead from multiple stab wounds, the broken body of Dingo next to him. The police interviewed me about my horrifying late-night encounter, but there wasn't much they could do. There were no signs of a break-in, no CCTV footage, no witnesses to the actual crime, and no witnesses at all except me. There was nothing to explain Dalton's mutilated corpse. They never found the killer. But that isn't what keeps me up at night. You see, the worst detail of the case was the fact that the monster who had committed the crime hadn't just killed Dalton, he had sliced and peeled off sections of his skin, flesh, and scalp. The coroner gave the time of death to be around 11 p.m., more than an hour before Dalton appeared at my back door. Whoever I spoke to that night, they certainly weren't Dalton. But they wore his face,